Hi everybody, it's Mr. Gray here. Thank you again for sending all your kids for such a great week of learning that we have. I have a few announcements. Thank you for signing up for the OCC Planetarium, signing the permission slip for that. We got pretty much everybody has done that, so thank you very much. If you're not sure if you have, you can email me, but almost everyone has done it. Thank you for sending in field trip donations. That really helps us to be able to put on these field trips, and so we're trying to get more. So if you haven't done that and are willing to send $45 for the field trip donation, please do that. But we're very thankful for those of you who've sent in money for the field trips. So thank you for that, big time. The last thing is for like a big announcement is next week. The big thing on the kids' mind is going to be their chit chat speeches. So 4 times during the year, we'll take a week and really focus on that. So we'll have between 5 and 7 different students do their speech each day next week. So we have a little bit of a lighter load in terms of academics next week because we're taking time to do those speeches where every student will speak. Their topic was, if I were the principal of Santiago Hills, what would I change? And so for you guys to know that the speeches and really a lot of the projects are thought of as it's a learning process. The goal isn't exactly to get a good grade on the speech or to be so worried that I'm going to get a bad grade. The goal is to take this skill in public speaking and try to get better at it. And so ways you can do that is by practicing and talking to people. So I'm hoping that for a lot of these projects, that the first time you hear about them is not when the grade comes home, it's as the students are working. So if you can check in on their projects and ask them, what's going on? What are you thinking about? Why did you choose this and not this? Have you asked Mr. Gray about this? So that constant feedback that the kids are getting from me and from you is really supporting their learning and helping out. So hopefully you're hearing about chit chats. Hopefully you're hearing about the iPhone upgrade project where the kids are deciding, should I get a new iPhone? Apple just released their phones. And so I'm taking into account all these different things, and they should be interviewing you about that. And the last thing I'll say about the projects is, it's not a chance where I'm trying to get them or give them a bad grade. So nothing is so set in stone or so dire that students can't come talk to me. So that's really the big key that we want is if students have questions, if they're worried about finishing on time, if there's dialogue between them and me and they're the ones that are starting to do that, starting to say, okay, I need to go talk to Mr. Gray about this, then that's what we're looking for, and that's how they're going to grow. So those are all the big announcements. There's some other links that you've heard about before, the yearbook and library volunteer. So you can always check that updates page, but those are all the big announcements for the week. In reading next week, we're going to be setting up an online reading log that the kids will fill out daily, and that will help them track their own reading and set goals. We'll also start our first big reading unit, which is about analyzing themes. So we'll be reading from the realistic fiction section of the library. The kids will be choosing books, and we'll really talk about first of all, like what is a theme, but for the moment, we'll get into how can you write well about books and how can you reflect on your writing about books. So that'll be reading next week. In writing next week, the kids will be revising their personal narratives. So they have written one in their writer's notebook. They might have written even a second one or are working on that. But now we're really digging into the revision process and lifting the level of the narratives that they're writing. So we're looking at a couple things next week. The first is elaborating on the important parts of the story and kind of playing with the speed. So if it's a really important part, I might slow that down and stretch out the heart of the story to make the reader feel the tension or the excitement that is happening in the story. The second thing is bringing forth the story arcs. We're going to be talking about how stories tend to go, the structure of stories, and what a story arc is. And that will hopefully help students be able to plan out their writing or also emphasize important times in the actual story. In math, like I had mentioned, we're going to finish up their iPhone project. So they're turning in 2 things. They're going to turn in 1 slide and give a presentation on Tuesday, which basically says, this is the phone that I'm looking to upgrade, and I'm looking to upgrade to this phone. They don't have a phone, all of them, so they were just choosing one at random, or what their parents have, what you guys have. And so they're going to have 1 slide that basically says, here's what I decided. I'm going to upgrade or I'm not going to decide, and this is what I took into account. Then by Friday, they're going to turn in what is in the structure of a research paper, but it's a very small amount of writing, where they just go through what they did. Was money a factor? Did they consider the trade-in? Did they consider paying monthly? Do they pay it all at one time? Did they get Apple Care? All these other things that they might consider. And they're going to kind of talk about that, including what they asked you and what they interviewed you or other students about their decisions about upgrading phones. And then at the end of the week, we'll take a little detour from that to talk about Continental Mathematics League. We'll do a little intro to that, and you'll hear more about that as we go on throughout the year. In social studies, this last week, the kids did some background research on learning about totem poles. We had talked about, generally speaking, these different geographic regions of the country where all sorts of Native American tribes were. Eastern woodlands, Great Plains, Pacific Northwest, Desert Southwest. There are others, but those are the ones we focus on. And now we're zooming in a little bit to talk about Native American folklore and traditions, and to do that, we're looking at totem poles. So the kids did some background research to learn about what they are, and then next week they're going to actually make their own totem poles in class, and also write a story similar to how totem poles were used, in that it's telling the story of your family or your values, or like a historical event that's important to your family. So we're using that totem pole as a symbol for family or themselves or history, and then they're going to tell like a folklore tale about that. So that should be really fun. The totem poles will be hanging up in class for quite a while. And before we start our next unit, we're going to kind of close out by that art project and that story. In science, the students are going to be designing a backpack using specific kinds of materials, and they're going to decide which materials would work better for the goals they want in designing their backpack. And of course, they'll go see Mrs. DeMarco for Science Lab. Next week in language, we're going to focus on spelling. So we did a week of vocabulary, a week of grammar. The third week is spelling, and we'll rotate through those. The focus of spelling this week is homophones, so words that sound the same but are spelled differently. Sometimes there are two, like weather and weather, and sometimes there are three, like there, and there. So the students will get those on Monday, and they'll take a spelling test on Friday. I would imagine that, thinking about like, are students going to be able to spell them and get a good grade on the test? It is probably yes, but it's a chance to review those words, practice those words, see them again, and talk about their different uses. Next week's habit in leadership is a great one for fifth graders, a great thing to practice and start to think about on a daily basis, which is think win-win and to try to resolve conflict. So I'm actively going to be thinking about the other person and what works best for them in addition to what works best for me. It's applicable to conversations with parents. It's applicable to fights with my sibling. It's applicable to what's happening on the playground. And we're going to use an example from the 2016 Rio Olympics where two runners collided on the track, and they handled that situation very well, considering the stakes are so high at the Olympics. So if these two runners can work it out amongst themselves and think win-win at the highest level of the Olympics, I imagine we can try to think win-win and resolve conflict here at school and at home. That's only all the things that are happening at school this week. We have the field trip coming up pretty soon. You'll hear more about that in the next week's video. And of course, we have lots of things going on. As always, if you have any questions, emails, comments, please let me know. Have a great week. Bye-bye.